Ladies and gentlemen, RosterWatch Nation, welcome back to the epic RosterWatch Podcast, brought to you by RosterWatch.com and by Underdog Fantasy. Go to Underdog Fantasy right now. Use promo code ROSTER for 100% deposit bonus up to $100. Get into that Best Ball Mania 3 tournament. See if you can turn yourself into a millionaire or a multimillionaire. Talking to a man who's clearly a multimillionaire from his beautiful beachfront mansion in Florida today. He's one of the original OGs in the fantasy football space. Probably one of the first guys that I've ever even done like an interview over the interwebs with. I don't know if you remember, Dave, back at the Combine in like 2012 or something like that. It was the first time you and I ever talked. All this fantasy stuff. His name is Dave Richard. He's the senior fantasy writer over at CBS. You can find him on Twitter at Dave Richard. And you can also find CBS Sports HQ, which is their new 24/7 sports news and analysis streaming channel. Everyone should check it out at cbssportshq.com. Dave here to promote that. Dave, what the hell's going on? Brother?
What's up? Alex, hold on one second. Jeeves, did you park the Lamborghini? No, not the red one, the black one. Okay, great. Thank you. But, I'm from my beachfront mansion. I figured I might as well play the role. I had a sub from a gas station today for lunch. That's the truth. And you're making me out to be the Monopoly man on the beach with some, who knows what everywhere. But thanks, sure. At least the fantasy football part was mostly right. That was good.
Well, you got it's a sub, dude. Florida's a land of magic, dude. A sub from a gas station might not be that bad. You have subs from a grocery store out there at Publix that are so
Publix,
good.
Yes, chicken double sub. I didn't grow up on Publix subs, but I went to college at Miami, and okay. We get Publix subs all the time, so that is a thing in South Florida.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So, hey, who knows? It could be an awesome sub from a Florida gas station. You never know, man. All right. So today I just wanted, Dave's a big shot. He's with CBS Sports. He's definitely part of the content stream of everything that you see, and he all this stuff comes across his desk just as soon or before it comes across ours. So I wanted to talk about some of these latest fantasy football headlines with you. Just kind of see what you think, see what the narrative is, if there's anything to it, whether it's things we should be worried about or how they pertain to us. So first, I think that what I'd like to ask you about is just the Gronk retirement. That was the bombshell news from yesterday. Gronk comes out with an Instagram story, not in his Instagram note. I noticed he did not say anything about the Patriots, which was interesting to me.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
For our fantasy purposes, I guess that's not the most important thing. The most important thing is what to make of it. One, do you believe it? Two, what effect does it have on the rest of them? You've gotten a take from every fantasy analyst out there about who this helps the most, who it benefits. What say you, Dave Richard?
Well, it's going to help the Falcons and the Panthers and the Saints. Not that the Saints needed this. The Saints have Brady's number pretty well, but those other teams, it'll help them a lot. No, who does it help in fantasy? It's going to help Russell Gage first and foremost. Remember when Russell Gage signed with Tampa Bay, everybody kind of scratched their heads a little bit and said, well, isn't it a little much to plunk down that kind of money on Russell Gage when Godwin's going to be back eventually from the ACL tear? And I thought at the time that it was triple-fold why they made a move for Russell Gage. Number one was insurance for Chris Godwin. Number two was insurance in case Gronk retires. And number three, this is their number 3 receiver. And so we know that Antonio Brown's not coming back. I don't think Tyler Johnson will ever be that guy. Cyril Grayson, Brashad Perriman, no. It's going to be Russell Gage. And now that Gage is going to be given an opportunity to play more, I'm sure we'll see a ton of 3 and 4 receiver sets from the Bucs. I think Gage is going to be the one that benefits the most. I'm comfortable taking him, for example, in round 8 in a PPR draft. An obvious winner also for fantasy is Cameron Braid. He's the next guy up in Tampa Bay. And as long as the Bucs don't add another tight end, I think he's going to be an every down player for them too. I'm totally comfortable taking him as at least a tight end streamer to begin the year and someone who can be one of your last 3, maybe 4 picks on draft day. No one's going to go into their draft, Alex, and go, oh my God, I got to get Cameron Braid, please. Yeah. No one's going to do that. But there's obviously going to be multiple fantasy managers in every draft who might target Kelsey, might target Andrews, might target Pitts, and they don't get them. And then they're going to wait, and there's not going to be a value that they like. And they're going to find themselves in the double-digit rounds. They got all their other positions covered. They don't have a tight end. Braid's somebody that they can go to there. One other winner, if I may, is Mike Evans. And Evans has already been like the red zone / end zone guy for Tom Brady. Like Gronk had his, and Braid actually low-key had some end zone targets too.
Oh, yeah.
But Evans is the one who really benefited. And I think Evans will continue to see that catch share in the end zone, in the red zone. And I mean, all the pass catchers are going to benefit ultimately. 15% of Rob Gronkowski's yardage, or of Brady's passing yardage, went to Gronkowski. Kind of butchered that stat. I'll blame my publicist for that. Something like that, since I'm the beach bazillionaire now all of a sudden. But yeah, I think that's where we're coming out on it. Do I believe that he's retired? Yes, because he could have just not said anything and signed with Tampa Bay in late August if he wanted to, if he for sure wanted to play. And if he wasn't sure, he could have just waited even longer. I think this is it. I think Gronk is done. And in my opinion, not that you asked this, Alex, he's the best tight end of all time.
Oh, he's you think he's do you think he's better than Tony Gonzalez? Is it
Yes.
just because Tony Gonzalez, if you just look at the counting stats, I think.
Oh yeah, the stats are going to say Gonzalez, but
the stats don't take into account what a good blocker Gronkowski was and how he just dominated in the run game for so long. Also, Gronkowski, if you just look at the length of his career, I'd have to look at the lengths of their two careers, but it feels like Gronkowski got more done in a shorter amount of time.
That's what I think too.
But I think that the blocking for me is what would it hasn't been long enough for me to really dive in, but I would definitely think that the two you would only think about would be Tony G and Gronk.
Sure. 12 years. It was 12 years for Gonzalez, so not as long of a career, but pretty close between the two of them. Gonzalez's numbers are better. He played more games. He was healthier. So if you want to, if you want to buy into longevity as a way to judge these guys, Gonzalez is going to have Gronk whipped. But I just thought that Gronk was just an absolute dominator. Well, Gonzalez, like Gonzalez wasn't either. Well, he was too. But I like Gronk better. I think
with Gronk, you have. I can't believe we're talking about this. It's like it's such a sports talk radio subject. But with Gronk, you have obviously both first ballot Hall of Famers. You can't write the history of the league without talking about either of them. One, because of Tony G, with the proliferation of the ex-basketball playing type of, that type of above the rim tight end. It feels like he was kind of the, if not the first of his time, the most prolific of his time that was like that. But with Gronk, it was the complete, he was the complete tight end that was just everybody just looked at him and talked about what a different guy he was to play with, just about his both are just total studs. It's hard for me to say which one's better, but we certainly lost a good one there with Gronkowski.
Sure. They both redefine the position, Alex.
Yeah, for sure. And the other thing I would say that you mentioned about Braid, you can get him right now at the very end of your drafts. I think that's going to correct. I think that's kind of what you're baking in is by the time we get to these real drafts. But he's going to be a lifesaver, one of these kind of life vest type of tight ends that even if you don't even get the secondary guys you're interested in, like the Albertos or the Irv Smiths, or you take your stab at these, the Hayden Hursts, or because some of these trendy guys at the very end you might miss on them. It feels like Cameron Braid will probably be like a life vest at the very end that you'll be able to get to as long as things don't steam up too much on him.
I would be more excited about him if his schedule were easier at the beginning of the year. He's got the Cowboys in week 1, Saints in week 2. We know what the Saints do to the Bucs, and then the Packers in week 3, and then the Chiefs in week 4. He doesn't even face like the Falcons, Panthers, like those are the teams that we want him to go up against. That's not till week 5. There will still be demand for Brayton. He'll be one of those late round tight ends. But if the schedule were easier, I'd be more all in.
That's good points. Those are all
closer to top 10.
Those are all good. Those first four teams you just listed off are teams with good coverage, linebacker play, and good nickel corner and safety play. Yep. All right, so let's go to this other one. What about Robert Woods? Where the big headlines from him coming out of OTAs is that he's looking like he's the clear number one option. People are acting like he's going to be healthy. We've seen the videos of him cutting, moving, everything else like that. Well, do you believe he's going to be the number one option there? Are you worried about this Treylen Burke stuff? Them saying Treylen Burke is looking like he's the number three behind guys like Nick Westbrook-Akina and stuff. Like, what's your take on the Titans? What is Robert Woods worth in fantasy if he is truly the wide receiver one there in Tennessee?
Robert Woods is a 30-year-old wide receiver coming off of a torn ACL, going to a team that was very good at passing the football to a team that is like, ugh, when it comes to passing the football. They don't want to do it. They want to run. The thing that the coaches talk about the most with Robert Woods in Tennessee is how good of a run blocker he is. I don't know about you, Alex, but I'm in a quarter point per run blocking league. So I can't overvalue him. No, that's a lie. No one gives points for run blocking. It's a team that doesn't offer a ton of volume to one receiver. If there was no Treylen Burks there, I might be a little more interested in Woods, but he's a bench receiver for me in fantasy and one that I'm looking at in like round 9, round 10. And of course, Treylen Burks isn't going to be the number one receiver. A, he's a rookie. B, he wasn't a complete prospect when he was coming out of Arkansas. And C, apparently there was an asthma/conditioning issue that may have gone undiscovered in the draft process. I don't know if you heard anything about that, Alex. You might have heard something about that with Treylen Burks, but I didn't know about it. And it almost feels like the Titans weren't quite up on it. But that stuff can be fixed. He's not the first player to enter the NFL who had asthma. And if he's out of shape now, that doesn't mean he's going to be out of shape by mid-August. And I think the Treylen Burks will eventually take over as I like to think of him as the Derrick Henry of receivers in Tennessee. And they're just going to feed him. Whenever there's a rookie coming into a team, I think about, all right, what did this rookie do in college that the team can acclimate him into in the pros so that he can adjust and be productive and help me on my fantasy team? Because I'm a selfish jerk and I want my fantasy points. So one of those easy things is going to be short area targets. And I fully expect Treylen Burke sooner than later to be the target master in Tennessee. And by that, I mean target master Tennessee style. That's like maybe 6.5, 7 targets per game. It's not good enough to be a top 20 type of fantasy receiver. But if that's what Burks is getting, then you can imagine that Robert Woods probably won't get as much. I'm happy that he's running. He's a good dude. He's talked to me in the past. He's been cool with me. But I can't recommend him as anything more than a bench receiver in fantasy.
It's interesting what you said about Treylen Burks and the way that they're going to get him involved. That was the criticism that people had about how he was used at Arkansas, right? So all these gadget he plays, all these plays around the line of scrimmage, just trying to get the ball in his hands. It's like, well, of course that's what they're trying to do. He's the best player on the field. Like they're trying to get the ball in his hands. It's like
he's a giant, of course. He's going to bowl over these other defensive backs. They're going to do. This is what's going to make me mad. They're going to do with him what they should have been doing with Derrick Henry for years. They should have been lining up Derrick Henry in the slot and out wide and throwing him 2 and 3 yard routes and just let him catch the ball, turn around, and bulldoze a cornerback. Because that's an easy matchup. That's way better than running him between a bunch of 250 and 300-pound dudes.
You don't even get me started on his underutilization in the receiving game, Dave.
Yeah, he was on pace. He was on pace for almost 40 catches last year. We're hoping that comes back this year.
What about the Athletic? They had their. I saw an article from yesterday. They had their. I guess they do this stuff where they go around from rider to rider and they talk about their kind of breakout candidates. And the way that they did this one was somebody that was, I forgot, under a certain age, but the rule was they couldn't have been an all-pro and they could have never been to a Pro Bowl who might break out, right? And so tell me what you think about these possible breakouts. For quarterback, their consensus was Trevor Lawrence. For the running back, it was J.K. Dobbins. For the wide receiver, another Raven and Rashad Bateman. And for the tight end, it was Albert Okwuegbunam. Do any of those stick out to you? Do you like all 4 of those guys for future breakouts this year? Are there any that stand out to you as you liking more? Or you saying maybe kind of one you're scratching your head and saying, why would they have that guy? What do you think of those 4 nominees at the 4 skill positions from the Athletic?
Okay, if we're talking fantasy, I don't think I like any of them.
Okay, so
I don't think I like any of them as breakout candidates. None of the 4. As far as because when I think about a breakout player, the definition that I give, Alex, is that they're going to have career high numbers. But there's also the difference between career high numbers and career high numbers that make fantasy managers dominate their leagues.
Right.
So Rashad Bateman could have a career year. He could very easily have 65 catches for 850 yards and 5 touchdowns. Okay. He's only been in the league 2 years. It's his best year. It's a breakout of sorts. But I think if that's how his season ends, I don't think fantasy managers would say, wow, really glad I drafted that guy in round 5 or round 6. And I'm nervous about the target volume that he'll get. He might get a huge chunk of the target volume in Baltimore, but that's a team that I don't think is interested in passing like they did last year. I think they experimented with it. It didn't work out. I think they're going to try and go back to what they did a couple of years ago and run the football. And that might mean fewer pass attempts for Lamar Jackson, more rush attempts for Lamar Jackson, but fewer throws downfield. And Bateman's not the number 1 target. It's Mark Andrews. That guy's the number 1 target. So I'm nervous about Bateman. And I think there's only been 1 receiver in Baltimore in the last 5 years with over 1,000 yards, and it was Marquis Brown last year. I think that's the stat. Don't quote me on that one. But a big year for fantasy at minimum. That's really what I probably should have said instead of 1,000 yards. But maybe he did have 1,000 yards. What the hell? I don't have his numbers in front of me. So that brings me to Dobbins, because if the Ravens are going back to basics, then shouldn't that mean that J.K. Dobbins should dominate and break out and have his best year? Well, he can have his best year again because he's in his 2nd season of playing football, but that might not mean 1,500 total yards and 10 touchdowns and 45 catches or something like that. The one thing that the Ravens love to do, it's run the football, but they don't use one guy to run the football. They use 2 running backs. So Dobbins is going to share with somebody. Might be Mike Davis, might be Gus Edwards, might be Tyler Beatty. And I think they like Beatty. But there's definitely going to be work there for Lamar Jackson. He's going to continue to run the football. And it's so compartmentalized in that run game. And Dobbins is coming off of a torn ACL. And he's probably going to start training camp on the PUP list. Not 100% sure that he's going to come off of it by the time the preseason ends. That's a wait and see. Those are 2 guys I'm definitely not excited about drafting. I'm probably not going to draft him. Alberto is a good player, but I've been hearing that he's been seeing some competition from the rookie that they got. And this is a Russell Wilson offense.
Dulcich. I mean, Dulcich is he's a G. Yeah, he's so good.
I think he's George Kittle part 2. I really do. At least as far as his receiving skills go, I think when I watched him play, Alex, I thought I was watching George Kittle. I really liked him. Plus, he's got cool hair. And so he's going to be in a position to contribute in Denver. But Russell Wilson's always been a wide receiver guy. And he had a few years in Seattle when Jimmy Graham was doing his thing. But that's Jimmy Graham. This is Albert Okwuegbunam. It's not the same thing. I'm probably going to be at a point where I'm drafting Cameron Braid ahead of Albert Okwuegbunam. And I think the fantasy world will hate me for it, but I bet I'm going to be right about doing it. And that leaves Trevor Lawrence as the last guy to talk about. In 2 quarterback leagues, definitely targeting him. Definitely excited about the offense there. I think they're going to throw over 600 times easy. That's going to be a good thing for Lawrence. And I think he's a really talented quarterback. I'm throwing out most of everything from last year as far as statistics go and everything else. His receiving core stunk. There was no speed. There was no separation. When Laquan Treadwell is your best separator, you don't have a good receiving core. Right. So Lawrence, he's going to be like all the rookie quarterbacks from last year. They're not rookies anymore. They're all going to be drafted as guys who are breakout candidates and might be, a stud at quarterback. But I think Trey Lance has a much higher ceiling, and I think Justin Fields has a higher ceiling too.
For those keeping score at home, even when Dave Richards just busts out a stat that he has no idea whether it's true or not, it actually turns out to be true. The last 1,000-yard receiver for the Baltimore Ravens before Marquis Brown last year, who had 1,008, was Mike Wallace in 2016. 1,017. Now,
but that's
Mark Andrews
that's like
did have
6 years.
2016. So it would have been, I think you had it right because 5 years would have included 2021, right? So I think you were right. 2021.
Okay, here's the stat that
Mark Andrews was also Mark Andrews was not a receiver, but he's had over 1,000. He had over 1,000 last year. But as far as receivers,
sure. If you want to add pass catchers into it, then of course Andrews is going to qualify, and that's why we're taking Andrews. I'm not taking him in mid to late round 2. I really prefer him in early round 3, but most of the drafts I'm in, someone's taking him by 20th overall. Over the past 5 years, a Ravens wide receiver has had over 100 targets once, and that was last year.
Okay. Well, I mean, the 1,000-yard thing. That's the stat I meant to say. well, the 1,000-yard ones works too, right? Okay.
Yeah. Bottom line is that it's not a great place to be if you're a wide receiver. Okay.
Right.
You can get some great crab cake out there, and it's a really cool looking facility that the Ravens have, and the uniforms are cool and all that, but it's not a great place to be for fantasy.
I'm not sure that the Atlanta Falcons will be a great place to be for fantasy either. In that same article that I was mentioning about the fantasy predictions over on The Athletic, I wrote that it was Josh London who wrote this, but that can't be right because I was getting the name mixed up because he was talking about Drake London, whoever the reporter is there. I'm sorry to the guy, but Josh something. He's reporting that Drake London is sure to be at the top of the wide receiver pecking order this year. How are you dealing with Drake London? I think that it makes sense to project him at the top of that receiving order, but do you think he has a chance of like out targeting a Kyle Pitts? Like what is it we can expect from Drake London this year as a rookie in Atlanta?
Doesn't it feel like Arthur Smith is building a basketball team?
Yeah.
And that Marcus Mariota and Desmond Ridder are his point guards.
Yeah, man.
And all they're going to do is just they're going to have one or two reads, and they're going to find the receiver that they think is open, and they're just going to try and throw it a foot and a half over their head every time. That's what it feels like, because Drake London, huge dude, big catch radius, one big breakout year at USC. 11 catches per game is pretty hard to ignore, but he had a lot of targets like Treylen Burke's where they were short in breaking routes or, out routes inside of 15 yards, and he'd try and make some plays. I didn't love the talent compared to other receivers coming out in the draft, but I love the opportunity. And in fantasy football, opportunity is the name of the game. He's going to be the number one receiver there. He and Pitts are basically going to be, like Akeem the Dream and the Big Boss Man. They're going to be the twin towers in that offense, and they're just going to collect a bunch of high jump balls from Mariota and Ridder. And Ridder did a bunch of it in college with Alec Pierce. He's just going to keep on doing it now in the pros. He should fall into good production, dude. I think you're going to look at him. I think people are going to take him late round 7, early round 8 in full PPR, and maybe like a half round later in non-PPR. And they're going to hope that even if the Falcons only score, 23 passing touchdowns, that he and Pitt split half of them. And that means he gets around 6-7 touchdowns with it shot at 1,000 yards based on high volume in the passing game.
You could talk about an elite wide receiver 3. You're talking about 8th round, 9th round, you get that kind of production there. I mean, come on, that's big time. And the other thing I'll just say about his production is we got to remember earlier in his career, he was playing with guys that have shown their wares in the NFL to a good degree in Michael Pittman and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Yep. All right. What about this other one? Another rookie coming in. And this is more about just what this rookie means, because we have Matt Schneidman. He said that Alan Lazar looks to be the wide receiver 1 for the Packers in 2022. To me, I'm of two minds. I'm of the mind of, Aaron Rodgers is always going to have a dude that he trusts, right? Trust is such a big deal with this guy, and he's so petty. And, it took him so long to even start to like Devonta Adams, if you'll remember that. The other thing is, though, the team did give him the opportunity to give his input, and he said he liked Christian Watson. It made me sort of think that maybe he'll take a little bit of accountability for Watson when he comes in, maybe try to put the guy under his wing a little bit. What do you think? Do you think Christian Watson could pose a threat to Alan Lazar? Do you think because Alan Lazar is going pretty late right now in these drafts? people aren't, looking at him like he could be the number one option in an Aaron Rodgers offense. How are you seeing this play out? I know that you're a Bears guy. So what do you think about these? No, you're not a Bears guy.
Not a Bears guy. No.
Okay. Well, you're a Chicago guy.
Chicago guy. Yes. Bears guy. Okay. No.
You're not even a close observer of the Bears. You're not even a close.
I have to be. It's my job. I got to be a close observer of everybody.
Okay. But you're not even an extra close observer of the Bears anymore? No?
Let's put it this way. If the Bears won the Super Bowl, I would be happy for my friends who are Bears fans, but I wouldn't celebrate. I've become totally – I don't have a team. You know who I root for on Sundays? I don't even root for the players on my fantasy team anymore, Alex. I have to root for the players who I tell people to start.
No,
that's where I come out. Right, because I want to be right. I want to feel good. I want to help people win.
Yeah.
And so, everything that I do, it's designed to help people win. And so I want to be right. I want to help people out. So maybe this is one of those guys that I'll help people out. I like Lazard. I think he's an excellent value. I was in a draft this week. He went in the 8th round. I'm okay with that. I think he might end up going higher than that if Watson proves to stumble out of the blocks. If Romeo Doubs, who I do like, doesn't do well in training camp. If Sammy Watkins gets hurt, could that possibly happen? I think Lazard can end up being the number one guy. And we have seen Rodgers latch on to receivers who he just develops rapport with, but the rapport doesn't happen in half a year. It takes a while. How long did it take Devonta Adams to become the number one guy there? Yeah. And listen, he had competition, but eventually he got elevated into that top role and he didn't let it go. And not that Lazard is the most explosive receiver in football, but he had a high explosive catch rate last year. He was top 24 among wide receivers in plays of 16 plus yards, divided by the number of snaps that he had. It's incredible. And he also had a lot of end zone targets. So in two ways, he kind of does things for fantasy managers that you want a receiver to do. Catches touchdowns, makes big plays. And if he continues to get that opportunity, because defenses aren't going to say, oh my God, we got to stop Allen Lazard. That'll never happen. All right. Until Allen Lazard starts going off for 120 yards and a tutty every week. And I don't think that's going to happen, but I think he'll be pretty good. I think he's going to be the top target getter in Green Bay. And to get the top target getter in Green Bay in round 8, that sounds like a win in fantasy. And the other thing you can do is you can draft Lazard in round 8, and then you can get Christian Watson in round 10, 11, 12.
Sure. And then the other thing that could help Lazard is that the news could come out, it looks like Robert Tonyan might be starting the season on the physically unable to perform list, which kind of elevates the targets there for everybody. All right, so we'll have two last questions here for you, but before we do, the two questions that we had, the two big questions that we ask everybody. But before we do, as a non-Chicago fan, I just got to ask you about Justin Fields in this report. It was Kevin Fishbane, who's been covering the Bears for a long time. I believe he's now with The Athletic. He says that Luke Getsy's new scheme in Chicago is going to lead to more rushing yards for Justin Fields in 2022. I haven't done enough of a deep dive into Getsy to really know exactly what he means by that. I'm assuming that he has, though. But when I hear about rushing yards, extra rushing yards, my ears do perk up. Are you buying in on Fields this year? Or are you interested? It feels like a lot of people are kind of out because they haven't done too much to surround him with talent like some of these other young quarterbacks that have been taken the last few years.
Think about what it'll cost to get Justin Fields onto your fantasy team this year.
Yeah, very little.
What round I did a draft this week, Alex. What round do you think he went in?
Just a traditional one quarterback.
We went 15 rounds. One quarterback.
I bet he went in the 11th or the 12th round.
13th round.
13th round.
And this is where I would expect maybe he goes in the 12th. And if he has a banger of a preseason, he'll go higher for sure. But if things hold as they are, he's going to be a late round pick because no one believes in the Bears offense being great. No one believes in Justin Fields being great. They'd rather invest, like I said earlier, in Trey Lance, who was also a 13th round pick. But it's also a position that it's just so deep. You can wait to take a quarterback who can be your starter. Not that you're drafting Fields to be your starter. You're drafting him to be a blue chip in a trade, or maybe he does break out and he has a big year because he's running the ball like Lamar Jackson. I think it's smart of Luke Getsy to do that. but I have a hard time believing that this is going to be a functional offense when the offensive line is a mess. They might be starting a 5th rounder at left tackle, which, I mean, that's a recipe for disaster right there, unless the dude is just amazing. And maybe he is, crazier things have happened in the NFL. But that's part one. Part two is that the receiving core is Darnell Mooney, Cole Kmet, Byron Pringle. Those are literally the 3 best receivers in Chicago right now. You want to throw Velus Jones in there, you can. It's still ugly. There are teams where Darnell Mooney would be probably the number 3, and a handful where he'd be the number 2. On top of all that, they're playing the 49ers in week 1 and the Packers in week 2. 2 tough defenses. So my fear is, here's what I think. My fear is that people are going to draft Fields and they're going to do it with a late round pick. And after the first 2 games of the year, they're going to say, oh, what am I doing? Why is he on my bench? I'm never going to start him. I've got, Stafford, Burrow, whoever. I'm going to cut him. Someone's going to pick him up mid-season when he starts to catch a little fire, maybe. That's where I would want to be. So I don't want to draft Justin Fields. I'm going to let somebody else do that. And I will try to pick him up maybe as a bye week replacement and maybe hang on to him for a couple weeks after that week when I definitely need him, thinking that he can start to show some of the promise that he had when he played at Ohio State. He's just in such a tough situation. Think about any other quarterback put in that situation. Even if Josh Allen changed places with Justin Fields, how excited would you be to draft Josh Allen? You wouldn't be.
Yeah.
As good as he is, I don't think, honestly, like, is he even a round 8 pick if he's in Chicago? I don't think so.
It's a weird thought experiment. I'm not sure. I'd have to think about, because Josh Allen, now he's gotten to the point where he's awesome. But how much of that is surrounding talent? How much of that is coaching? How much of that is all the ancillary pieces? And of course, when answering that question, Dave Richard let us all know that aside from even his answer, that we're gonna get Trey Lance, Justin Fields in week 1 of this year.
Assuming they stay healthy and assuming Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't, make the miraculous recovery and stay in San Francisco. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's why we've got Bears and 49ers in week 1.
That's great.
Because that's a fun matchup that people will be able to watch. That'll be in Chicago too. So nice. Won't be one of the, and maybe it is a late game. What the hell I don't know what time these games are, but that is the matchup in week 1.
He is Dave Richard. You can find him, of course, on Twitter at Dave Richard. He's the senior fantasy writer over at CBS Sports, where right now CBS Sports HQ is running a 24/7 sports news and analysis streaming channel. Everybody should check it out at cbssportshq.com. And, of course, if you're not following Dave, if you're watching this, you're into fantasy enough to where you're following Dave. But if not, please, he's a great friend of ours, a great fantasy analyst, a great mind in the industry. We'd appreciate you giving him a follow on Twitter at Dave Richard. Of course, go to our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Use the promo code ROSTER to get that 100% deposit bonus up to $100. It helps us out greatly. It also helps us out a bunch if you can rate and review the podcast wherever you listen, or give it a like and a subscribe over on YouTube. Okay, Dave, the two most important questions, the questions that people fast forward to the end to hear the answer to. Okay. The single player that you're positive is going too late in early redraft leagues, early best ball leagues, whatever. The player who you are sure right now is going to be a steal.
Who's going way too late in best ball.
Way too late in
or
best ball.
Any league.
Or
it doesn't
early
have to be
redraft.
Just
not dynasty, just regular one season fantasy for 2022.
I'm going to jump on the whole late quarterback thing, and I'm going to go with a guy who has never won a playoff game and has never been like a mega stud, or he has, but it's been a while, and it's Derek Carr. I think the fact that he's got Devonta Adams and they have reconnected in a major way, and that's a receiving core that also has Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, and a better coaching staff than what he had last year. I think Derek Carr takes a step forward this year statistically, and he's going way late, and he's literally a guy you can start in week 1. It should be a high scoring game against the Chargers. That's his week 1 matchup. He's got the Cardinals after that in week 2. That's a team whose secondary does not look good in their pass rush. Basically got absorbed by the Raiders because they got Chandler Jones. He's got the Titans in week 3, another high scoring game against Denver and then Kansas City and then a bye and then Houston. And you get my point.
That's a beautiful, that's a beautiful schedule to start, man.
I mean, the Chargers game could be tied. That Chargers defense on paper looks unstoppable, but I still think there's going to be points scored in that game. The Raiders might not win half of these games. They probably won't beat the Chargers in week 1, but I think Derek Carr is going to have a hot start to the year, and I think he'll stay hot all year, and you can get him in round 10 plus. So a quarterback that you can wait on. My advice generally with quarterbacks, Alex, is you just wait till there's a really good value. It doesn't have to be late. It can be Josh Allen with the Bills in round 5. Patrick Mahomes in round 5.
Not this Cognitive Bears version we've been talking about.
No, don't get him in round 5. Justin Herbert. You're going to see Justin Herbert go like after Mahomes. I like Herbert better than Mahomes. He's going to be someone that I would love to have in round 5. You just wait for that value. And if you don't ever see it, you just take Derek Carr in round 10, 11, 12, and you call it a day.
I love it. I'm on Carr too, man. I think that's a great call. Okay, and then what about, so the opposite of that question, the other side of the coin, the last question, the single player you're positive is going too early in these early redraft leagues. Who are you sure will be a bust?
Write it in pencil, not in pen. But
Okay.
Cam Akers is for now the one that I see people taking him in round 3, and I don't get it because the last time I saw him, he was slow, he was not explosive, and even though they gave him a ton of work in this Rams offense, he wasn't doing a whole lot with it. I want to see footage of him exploding, making those cuts like he made at Florida State. I want to see the Rams commit to him, not just in coach speak, but maybe from what we hear about some joint practices that they have, because he's not going to play in the preseason. But the track record of Sean McVay is he likes to use one running back. I'm worried about that because they've got Kyron Williams. They drafted him. That's a passing downs back. And if he does that role, remember we talked earlier in the show about what can the rookies do that they're already comfortable doing from their time in college. That's what Kyron Williams can do. If Williams is a passing downs back, that takes work away from Cam Akers. And Akers also has not been able to stay healthy for the majority of his career in the NFL. So I'm very skeptical about Cam Akers being worthy of one of the first, 30 picks in a fantasy draft.